power outage or some kind of a severe crash or something of your system. And then when the computer comes back up, it's the X2FS file system wants to verify the integrity of the disk, and this could take many, many minutes to happen. And that's a problem on like, you know, some kind of critical server or something. You might not be able to wait that 5 minutes that the computer is coming back up and verifying the integrity of the disk. That 5 minutes is just too long to wait. So in response to that, people have written journaling file systems. And the Riser file system is probably the most popular of these. It was added to the 2.4.1 kernel of Linux. Okay? And a journaling file system, basically what it does is it keeps track of all the files that were open and all the things that were happening on the disk. And then if in the case of some power outage, when it comes back up, it knows which parts of the disk to check. It doesn't have to check the entire disk, and it knows which parts to check and verify for the integrity of the disk in those certain areas. Okay, so that's why a journaling file system can come up much faster, just in a matter of 10 seconds or something. The verification of the integrity of the disk can be done because it knows exactly where on the disk to check. Now, other journaling file systems that are out there are the X3FS, which is an extension of this one. There's journaling file systems being written by IBM and Silicon Graphics that will be compatible with Linux. Okay, so that's the journaling file systems. One last thing I want to mention here is just to make sure you understand what this kernel version number means. The first number in here is the major release number. Okay, and this just says that it's major release number 2. Okay, the second number here is very critical. This number, if it's an even number, like if it's 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, then that represents a stable kernel release. If that's an odd number, then that represents an experimental kernel release. And you should not be running odd kernel numbers. If that's an odd number, you should not be running those kernels on your computer because they're experimental. There's going to be lots of bugs in them. They're still being tested out. The only reason you'd want to do that is to try out some new feature or something like that that experimental kernel has that the stable kernel before it didn't have. And then finally, the last number here is the minor release number. Okay, so when I said the Riser file system was on 2.4.1 kernels, it'll be on all the kernels after that as well. So 2.4.2, 2.4.3, 2.6.0 is after this one, and so on. You see how this works now. Now, what I want to make sure you understand is that there's this kernel release number, this kernel version number, and there's also distribution release numbers. Like Red Hat, might be on to version like 7.2 or something like that. That has nothing to do with this kernel number. There is a specific kernel that Red Hat 7.2 uses, but the 7.2 is not the kernel version number. So make sure you understand the differences there. This is just, the 7.2 release of Red Hat, 7.0, 6.8, 6.6. They could have all used the same kernel number. I don't know exactly what kernel numbers each Red Hat version uses. We'll talk later about how to determine what kernel you're using when we do the installation. All right, well, it's time to wrap up our last nugget on installation planning, and in the next nuggets we'll be actually doing an installation. So in this nugget we talked about the hardware needs of your computer, and that really depends on the purpose of the computer. We talked about hardware compatibility and how to determine hardware compatibility for Linux. I tried to point you to some websites and some resources where you can find out that information. And then we talked about partitions and how to partition your disk and determining the various sizes for the different partitions. And finally, we just talked about the different file systems that are out there and what you should use for your system if it's some sort of mission-critical application. Well, I hope you found this nugget informative, and thanks for viewing.